The webinar today is on forensic veterinary medicine, animal crime investigation. My name is Dr. Pat Wolfert-Bethke. This career presentation is brought to you by the AVMA, which represents more than 89,000 member veterinarians from all fields of the profession, and the AVMA Veterinary Career Center. The VCC is a well-known niche professional job board for your veterinary career needs, including job search and career assistance, and is the founding member of the Veterinary Career Network. Jobs posted on any of the 50 VCN partner sites are seen on every site on the network, making your job search easier. Find us on Facebook at AVMA Vets and Twitter at AVMA Vet Jobs. You are in listen mode only. If you have any questions, type them into the question area on your control panel to be answered during the question and answer period at the end. This webinar is being recorded. It will be posted at avma.org/career-webinars. I am pleased to welcome Dr. Melinda Merck. Dr. Merck received her DVM from Michigan State University. She is the owner of Veterinary Forensics Consulting in Austin, Texas, where she assists investigators of animal cruelty with crime scene investigation. She also provides veterinary forensic training to veterinary, attorney, and law enforcement professionals in the investigation and prosecution of animal cruelty cases. She is an author of books on veterinary forensics and is an instructor for online veterinary forensics courses. I will now turn the presentation over to Dr. Merck.
Hello, everyone. Hopefully you can see my screen. And I apologize, my computer's, all right, there we go, wanting to be slow. All right, there we go. All right, so welcome. I'm glad everyone is joining us. So I'm going to discuss the various ways for veterinarians and veterinary technicians to become involved in the field of forensic veterinary medicine and the pros and cons in some of those options. First of all, we need to define or help you understand what does it mean, forensic veterinary medicine. Well, the term forensic actually means legal. And according to the Webster Dictionary, it's relating to or dealing with the application of scientific or medical knowledge to legal problems. It also, what it really is meaning is that what we're doing is applying veterinary medicine and answering questions in a legal forum. So the potential roles for a veterinarian is as a private practitioner to work in this field, as a shelter veterinarian, as a pathologist in diagnostic laboratories or at universities, in animal welfare organizations. There are opportunities in the state through the Department of Agriculture or wildlife divisions. And then there's federal potential roles working for the USDA or the federal wildlife units. Then as a private consultant, you can work in this field, but that requires a certain level of experience and training. As the veterinarian's work in this includes a variety of things. It's examining live animals at the local shelter or on the scene, at a practice, performing necropsies, working on scene to assist with the processing of the crime scene and triaging of animals, in post-seizure care for the animals and documentation of those animals, case evaluation and reviewing when you're doing case evaluation, this is reviewing case materials, developing a report for those, whether it's for a criminal or civil case, and then developing a forensic report for all the cases that you work on, and then testifying, which may be as your role in that case or as you are called in as an expert or as a consultant on the case. Now for the veterinary technician, the role can be working at a local shelter, as an employee, as a volunteer, as a contract worker, and we're going to talk more about all of this as we go along. And also a veterinary technician, an ideal role would be working as an animal cruelty investigator, because you're bringing in your knowledge of animals and veterinary medicine as well into that investigation. Working for animal welfare organizations, again, as an employee, volunteer, or contract worker. The state departments may utilize technicians in the Department of Ag or Wildlife. And then on the federal level, and the USDA and the wildlife divisions, they may utilize veterinary technicians. The role for a technician, ideally, technicians can be ideal for the processing of an animal crime scene. And that includes evidence identification, analysis, collection of evidence, documentation of the scene, including photography and videography. But doing crime scene investigation does require training. Often the technicians are used for assistance with the animals, whether it's removal from the scene, such as in large-scale cases, examinations with of the animals, assisting with that, and that's also with live or deceased and doing necropsies. And then a role for the technicians, and this is a big one, especially for our large cases, is the post-seizure care of the animals and the documentation of what's going on with them after they've been removed from the scene. You need to understand what happens or what the needs are in all these different types of investigations so that you can understand your potential roles. In a criminal investigation, first of all, there's different types of agencies that investigate or may be involved with animal-related crimes. So it varies based on your jurisdiction. This may fall under animal services or animal control. It may be law enforcement agency, and that could be local or state or federal level. In Colorado and Missouri, as examples, they have, like Denver Dumb Friends League and Humane Society of Missouri, they actually have jurisdiction across the whole state to do investigations. So the laws that apply may vary as well. It may be local or ordinance law that's being applied to the case, or a state criminal law, or a federal law. There's warrants that often need to be obtained for these cases, and that may be for an inspection of the site or the animal, a search, seizure of the animals. Is there probable cause? And this is where especially veterinarians can help with the drafting of these warrants, is certain language that may need to be included in that warrant, and a warrant for crime scene investigation. Then we have the animal examinations, forensic testing that may need to be conducted. And then there may or may not be a grand jury, depending on your jurisdiction, which may require your testimony. There may or may not be depositions, which is actually testimony before a trial that is recorded. Then there may be hearings they need your assistance with prior to a trial, the trial, and then there may be a need for a veterinarian to testify during sentencing. In criminal investigations, you would work with investigators and prosecutor or the defense side. In civil investigations, you have the plaintiff and the defendant. And this may be related to a criminal case, such as a post-criminal case outcome that now they're filing a civil action. Often these are divorce cases, dog bite cases. It can be child custody cases like domestic violence, where there's been an animal abused as well. And then, unfortunately, what's growing is the police shooting of dogs. Those are becoming more and more civil cases. Usually there's depositions in these types of cases, a trial, and the issues of law may vary, but the burden of proof is typically lower than in criminal cases. And you will work with either the plaintiff or the defense side. The other aspect you may be involved with is board investigations, veterinary board investigations. So that's going to involve the state veterinary board and then the defendant. You may be asked to testify as a fact or as an expert witness. You may be asked for a written opinion and to testify in a hearing. And the issues of law are the Veterinary Practice Act violations and standard of care. All right, general information about employment in this field. Not all agencies that investigate animal cruelty employ someone that's dedicated just to cruelty or animal investigations. Often there may be an employment slot that includes that, but you also have multiple duties. Some have contracts with people, veterinarians or technicians with expertise to use just on an as-needed case basis, but full-time employment is rare in this field. It may be a shelter that has a caseload enough to to support cruelty investigations. It may be a large animal welfare agency or state or federal government, but full-time employment is very rare. All right, so now we're going to talk about the different areas of employment or the roles. And so as a shelter veterinarian working for a government shelter as an employee, often the primary duties don't include don't just focus on cruelty work. Your primary duties are usually involving spay and neutering and other shelter duties, and those will supersede any forensic work that's needed. You're going to be examining live animals, be asked to perform necropsies. The problem is you may not have full facilities, access to x-rays, or even your examination area may not be available. So you may have to use outside veterinary hospitals, or emergency clinics are often willing to donate their space to be used. The use of a veterinarian at a crime scene is ideal. The problem becomes scheduling the veterinarian and covering their other duties at a shelter. In Hillsborough County, Florida, for example, they always bring a veterinarian to, especially their large-scale cases, but they have a lot of veterinarians and they can schedule and cover it to do that. So the other role for a veterinarian working at a shelter is large-scale cases, and that not only doing the work, but supervising other veterinarians, especially volunteer veterinarians, and organizing those teams, and of course, testimony on the cases. You may be asked to train others, train investigators, or speak to the local veterinary associations, but that requires expertise and experience. You may be asked to speak to the media regarding a case. Another role is advocacy regarding your local and state laws. There's issues with domestic violence and what's happening to the animals in those cases, and creating safe haven programs, developing appropriate cruelty response units in your area. But finances are always an issue in shelters. Sometimes anybody who wants to do donations to shelters, it may go into a general county or city fund, but it may be possible to set up where those funds that are so that they are directed to the shelter for specific use, but that has to be worked out. And one example in New Mexico, and this is rare, it's a one-off I think right now, but the sheriff there built a shelter to add on to the sheriff's department just for animals seized in cruelty cases, and hired a local veterinarian part-time to work with their cases. So that's just an example of how you may have to drive things and develop things in your area. Then there's the shelters, working for a government shelter as a consulting veterinarian, where you're not employed full-time. And it may be that the shelter veterinarian has too much work to do, they don't have time for cruelty cases, or they don't have the needed expertise. You have the same role as you do with all the cruelty cases, and this is ideal sometimes because of the flexibility of a consulting veterinarian, especially if they just came upon a cruelty case and they need someone now. You may use their facilities, another facility such as an emergency clinic, or your own practice. You want to establish your fees up front, and usually there's a contract that you have with them about that. And we're going to talk about fees towards the end. You can work as in a private rescue agency or a private shelter, and that's working as an employee or a consulting veterinarian or a contract veterinarian. They may have other veterinarians that are working there or volunteering there that don't have training or expertise. Now, your involvement with cruelty cases is maybe a suspected abuse case comes into that shelter, or that rescue agency is supporting the local investigators on a large-scale case. An investigator or prosecutor may bring a case to you. It just depends on the situation in the government shelter, where they may be full or not have people there that can do the cruelty investigations. So in Botetourt, Virginia, that's what they have. They only have animal control. They don't have an official, they have a tiny government shelter. So what they've worked with is the local private rescue agency to bring cruelty cases there. And then they have an employee, a full-time veterinarian that can work on the animal cruelty cases. But the thing with the private rescue agencies is people want to jump on this bandwagon of being part of cruelty investigations and support. Private rescue agencies typically do not have the legal authority to investigate cruelty, so they have to work with the agencies that do, all right? And that can become a big issue. In a shelter for a veterinary technician, it's similar roles as a veterinarian working as an employee, contractor, or volunteer. Certainly veterinary technicians are more flexible in their schedule at a shelter than the veterinarian to assist on crime scenes. And again, I think they're more ideal to process a crime scene. They can assist an investigator on scene with the scene and the animal assessment, right? So especially if you can't have a veterinarian there, you can use some kind of video chat like FaceTime on scene and show these issues with the scene or with the animal, and then have that exchange with the veterinarian about what you're seeing. All right, a role as a private practitioner, and this is how I got started. As I was in private practice, I was volunteering with shelters or supporting shelters, and so number one is of course reporting suspected abuse, whether a Good Samaritan has brought in the patient or the client has brought in an animal. You can work as a consulting veterinarian for that investigating agency in your area or a private shelter, the prosecution, defense, civil, veterinary board investigations. Your roles can be crime scene response, the examination of the animals, necropsies, also analysis of the case where a case has been brought to you by a prosecutor, an investigator, or the defense, and again, civil and board investigations. You may be a fact or an expert witness depending on your role and expertise, and we're going to talk more about that at the end. As a private practitioner, you may become involved in advocacy, especially during the legislative sessions, similar as a shelter veterinarian. Things to consider in private practice is the Veterinary Practice Act. Do you have mandatory reporting in your area? Do you have protection of civil and criminal liability? What is the medical record confidentiality? Often it requires a subpoena for the actual medical records, not for the forensic report, but the medical records. Other considerations people bring up is, what about my clients, and what are they going to think, and the staff morale and the safety of your staff, and are you going to house any of the victims? So in my practice, my clients love that I worked with animal cruelty. It is a positive thing to do this, but we also marketed to the clients. We told them what we were doing. We told them that we had an animal there that was a victim of cruelty. And what they would do is go tell all their friends, right? Or they want to know if you're going to be on the news. We also had a donation jar for the victims of cruelty that we were taking care of out of our own pockets, and they would donate to them, and often they would adopt those victims. So then they expanded your patient base. So it worked out that worked out well. The staff loved that you do something altruistic and work on behalf of these victims. Turnover became less. Oftentimes they would clock out and just donate their time to work on a case. Safety, it's no more issues about safety working on these cases at your practice than it is because you have controlled drugs. So, not allowing someone to leave on by themselves at night, having security cameras is always a good idea. All right, pathologists in doing veterinary forensics. It's not offered as training in all veterinary schools. I think we have 4. Some of them have full courses, University of Georgia, Florida, Purdue. There are electives. Some of them incorporated into their shelter medicine electives and offer some lectures on it. The issues for pathologists is their caseload, having a true forensic pathology residency. Who teaches the resident? Can they work with medical examiners, anthropologists? There's concerns at the university level about liability, especially in the vet schools, because this is a new area for them. What's the time commitment on these cases with all the, not only doing the necropsies, but testifying in the legal process, and they don't understand that system. They don't have protocols in place to deal with these. We have some vet school laboratories that refuse to examine potential or known legal cases, either histopathology or necropsy, because they don't want to testify. So that needs to be cleared up and identified before you submit to them. And then some vet schools, labs refuse outside submissions, only look at caseloads that come from within their own teaching hospitals. The other issues we run up with the pathologists is that they're not trained or set up to issue a cause of death. They tend to send to the veterinarian that submitted the samples or the body an entire list of possible rule outs. and then they rely on the submitting veterinarian to assess those findings in the context of the history and the known knowledge about the animal. They also don't have a lot of experience in doing necropsies on known accidental trauma or injury. So hit by cars, they may not know what we normally see in a hit by car because they're not doing those necropsies or examining those cases. The primary cases that they deal with are death or euthanasia within the hospital, and then their primary focus is on areas of research, which is typically disease. So the point is you need to identify pathologists and work with pathologists that are want to work with these cases, though there's more and more forensic interest in forensics from pathologists. The normal necropsy procedures that they perform isn't always ideal for a forensic case. It needs to be customized based on where you've got areas of injury, making sure that they do skin reflection on the body. And then they need to document their findings differently, starting with photography on the outside packaging. It's not necessarily a protocol they're used to. At Colorado State, they actually videotape the entire legal necropsy. They may not have in place chain of custody procedures. These are areas where we need to, you can work with your local vet school or pathology group in establishing these. How do they process the body, samples to collect, and then the big one is how long are they going to hold the body and the samples and the slides, because there's some legal requirements there. So state labs, veterinary labs may not always have a board of pathologists. Again, they may refuse legal cases. You can work and try to, as a pathologist in veterinary schools, but you may not get enough cases to support doing forensic specialties unless you're in a urban area where you're working, getting a lot more than the more rural areas. A private pathology lab is a possible option. We're seeing more and more of those doing that. Commercial labs usually only sending in microscopic submissions. But the future, are we looking at potentially having a veterinary lab next door to the medical examiner, running it through the government facility? But again, are they going to have a caseload, and who's going to fund it? Now, the exception to this is the state and federal fish and wildlife labs, because they have specific areas where they will conduct those. All right. So moving on to the large nonprofit organizations, animal welfare agencies. These are national organizations. There's a few that do investigations of animal cruelty or support those. Some come in as support, like Red Rover or American Humane. They usually have investigators, quote unquote investigators, and I say that because they may have investigator expertise, but they don't have the authority to investigate. They come in to support local, state, or federal law enforcement and prosecutions, right? Primarily, these are large-scale cases that they deal with. They're not dealing with the individual types of cases. The veterinarian that works for them may consult on these smaller, like an individual gunshot victim or something, but it's a much less of your caseload. So it's going to be the animal fighting cases, it's going to be the puppy mills, the hoarding. That's primarily what you're going to be seeing. So your experience of the types of cases will be limited to those kinds of cases, which is fine, but that's your limitation and what you're going to be working on. The big deal about this is going to require extensive travel. You're always on call, right? And so you're going to always be have to be ready to go. It often, because the way that large-scale cases are processed is the same. It's the same command system as we use with disaster response. That team is usually the disaster response team. So you may be on call for that as well. Your duties can include crime scene response, supervision and organization of veterinary teams, because you're going to be bringing in outside teams, veterinarians and technicians, the post-seizure care at these temporary shelters or permanent shelters, and then phone consultations, a lot of email and phone work. It's integrated work with the agency's investigators that can vary. You may be involved with the planning of the case, the writing of the warrants, or you may work more as a consultant. When you do these cases, though, when you're traveling to these other states, it always requires that you have a veterinarian licensed in that host state. So it may be some organizations may require that you get temporary licensure or get a license in multiple states so that you are more usable in those states. Depending on the facilities available and working with these large agencies, you may receive bodies for necropsies. It depends on your training and expertise and what you're comfortable doing. They may provide facilities. Some of these large agencies like HSUS and ASPCA actually have a mobile unit that you can perform necropsies and exams in. They often discourage work for the defense. Not all of them, but some of them do. They don't want you doing any defense work, and that can be a problem for you as a consultant because you need to have balance, and so that you don't be accused of always working for the prosecution. They often allow you to work from home and then travel from there, so that's the advantage. You don't need to move. It does require leadership qualities in that you work with a lot of volunteers with variable training and skills and under very stressful and not ideal conditions. So it requires good interpersonal skills and working with other experts and law enforcement. You will have long hours on the scene and at the offsite shelter for examinations. So you'll be working sometimes from 4 a.m. till 9 o'clock at night. You need to be very flexible. So because the environment or issues are constantly changing, you may be the supervising forensic vet, which means you will be responsible for the reports of all the animals, following the outcomes of the animals, all the forensic testing, organizing all the documents, and testifying. So you also may be asked to do trainings internally and externally depending on your experience and expertise. With these non-profit large animal welfare agencies, they are what the focus in is directed by the board of directors, and that can be a changing climate year to year. So that can be frustrating where somebody else is dictating what the focus is. But if you're flexible, that can be just fine. It may or may not affect the work that you're doing. Doing remote work, you aren't as engaged or connected to the rest of your team, but so they often plan for several times a year having team building exercises. You may work as an employee, a consultant, or a volunteer. A consultant will have a contract with a daily rate of pay. They never pay you hourly because it's too expensive. And then travel expense reimbursement, even for volunteers. These major agencies have volunteer teams, and I encourage you to do that because it's a great way to get experience and figure out if this is what you want to do and learn more about the organizations. You're primarily, for a technician, in these large nonprofits, you're going to be assisting on large-scale cases. Again, it's animal removal, assistance with the exams, and then conducting lab tests, drawing the bloods, doing the treatments, follow-up assessments of the animals, and then post-seizure care. It's the same thing as veterinarians working as an employee, consultant, or volunteer and working with their volunteer teams. All right, for the State Department of Agriculture, you can have variable roles. It can be investigation, inspection of facilities. When you have public reports of complaints, they do not always have resources for cruelty response, and that's the big limitation. So they have to work with other agencies if they're going to do them. The laws applied are agriculture, and they're not necessarily cruelty laws, and you're going to deal with multiple species. As the USDA veterinarian, you can have variable positions. This can involve inspections and investigations. They're often doing field necropsies on the large animals and maybe exotics, and they have all types of species they have to work with, including mule deer. And the governing laws may be federal, such as the Michael Vick case, the dogfighting case. The USDA inspectors were the ones that investigated, but their veterinarians were not involved, right? Because they didn't do the cruelty investigation there. It's an opportunity to make a difference in working for the USDA, such as airline regulations and puppy mills and the soaring of horses. So it can be a good job there. The state and federal wildlife agencies, you have variable roles, investigation and inspection. You may or may not have state laws that apply. The federal laws may be regarding hunting, protected animals, import and exports of animals. then there's this wonderful forensics lab in Ashland, Oregon, that you can check out, and they employ veterinary pathologists, and they may employ veterinary technicians. And then there may be wildlife labs centered at universities. All right, the fees. So you want to consider setting up a separate LLC, a limited liability corporation, as again, finances are always an issue for government agencies. Your rate, it's okay to have a different rate for different types of work or who you're doing it for. So a shelter may not be able to pay as much as an attorney, right? Or sometimes the prosecution may have a set schedule what they pay experts. Right? So you can develop your rates or negotiate your rates based on who you're doing for. When you're doing it for a shelter or government shelter, typically you should do it as the same hourly rate as they're paying their shelter veterinarian. What is the average? What are they going rate in your area? Because that's already in that agency's budget. You want to charge for your time, and that includes your travel time, the work, and that includes your exams and the review of materials, the report writing, and your testimony. But you want to be reasonable on your time charges, because when you're new, it's going to take longer, so you don't want to overcharge because while you're learning, right? So it needs to be a reasonable fee. And you also can compare it to what they will charge for a legal necropsy at the university level, but also they're doing histopathology. So you want to keep that in mind if that's an additional fee that they're going to have to pay. For your testimony, your time should include your waiting time, right? Because you're going to go in and you're going to sit and wait. And you may, whatever they've scheduled you to testify, it may not happen until later that day or the next day. So you might want to consider a daily charge with a half-day minimum. So that'll include your minimum, that'll include your wait time. You want to charge for travel-related expenses, and then another way to do it is for your time is to just charge a flat fee of $250 to $500 for your travel days, so that you're paid for your time that way. Yeah, for phone call discussions, especially your initial discussion about a case and a consult, you may or may not charge, especially when you're just dealing with government agencies, unless that is your only work in the case, right? So as soon as you get a call, just write down all our contact information and the time, and then when you end. But usually I give the first 30 minutes to an hour free, so that we're to decide whether or not I'm even the right person to work on this case. Lab fees can be very expensive, so especially for government agencies, ideally set them up on their own account so that they are, one, it will reduce the expenses, and then they get the bill, and you aren't waiting to get paid while you had to pay the bill. And then you just charge an assessment fee of any lab work. Ideally, you know, when I first started doing this in Atlanta, you know, I wanted them to use me. So what I did is I said, just use me once, no charge. I'll do it no charge the first time. And let's see if this is going to work, or this is something that you want. And that's a way to get your foot in the door. And regarding fees, keep in mind that it can take 8 weeks plus to get payment, all right, because it's a government agency. All right, becoming an expert. Becoming an expert witness is a process in court, and it will happen every time you testify, right? And it's a process called voir dire, and it's where both sides look at your credentials through the court process, and you testify to your credentials, your experience, and your training. And this is to allow you to testify to your opinions on things, right? So every time you testify, you will go through this. When you've been declared an expert in a state or in a city, it's easier to be declared an expert over and over again. And so you want to keep a list of when you've been qualified and where and when. You will be qualified based on your training and or your experience. It doesn't require a special degree, right? They're going to look at attending conferences, webinars, trainings, and that needs to be on your CV and experience, right? You will always be qualified because you're a veterinarian. You can always be qualified as an expert in veterinary medicine, though they may add forensic veterinarian or forensic medicine, veterinary forensic medicine, right? That's how you become an expert. It's always in court, right? So let's talk about education, training, and experience and the opportunities for those. Just volunteer for experience will get you experience. There's national and state veterinary conferences. The AVMA typically has some lectures on veterinary forensic medicine. In fact, they have one in Indianapolis next Friday. NAVC has a standing track always on Saturday, the beginning of the conference, on veterinary forensics and animal crime scene investigation. And they have shelter medicine lectures and animal welfare lectures throughout the conference that address issues of animal abuse. So that's a great place to get. It's just a one-day lecture. Also, the online CE Vetfolio platform has recorded all the prior conference lectures, so you can go back. That requires membership to go back and listen to the prior conference lectures from AHA and NAVC. Other conferences, the Association of Prosecuting Attorneys has an annual conference. The International Veterinary Forensic Sciences Association has an annual conference. There's webinars that you can attend for free on Association of Prosecuting Attorneys, the National District Attorneys Association, the Humane Society, Veterinary Medical Association has some webinars about recognition and reporting of abuse, and then VIN sometimes has courses. Of course, that requires membership. And the HSVMA requires membership as well. I think it's $25. The American Academy of Forensic Sciences, this is a human forensics organization you can join. They have an annual conference that may have some animal stuff in it. Usually it's about some maulings, it's wildlife. They have a big wildlife, usually section in there that they will cover. But they also on their website have a listing of trainings in forensics. Textbooks. There's the Veterinary Forensics Animal Cruelty Investigation, second edition, that came out a few years ago that I was the editor. We've got multiple people that contributed to that. There's the Shelter Medicine textbook that includes forensics in there. There's a ton, if you just Google wildlife forensics, for those that are interested in that, there's a ton of books on that. There's a new book coming out. It's not out yet, but it's Veterinary Forensic Sciences. It's a case book. So that's coming out. And then if you want to access the Veterinary Pathology Journal, the September 1st, 2016 edition was all dedicated to veterinary forensics medicine. There's a training program available at University of Florida. It's a master's in veterinary forensics graduate program. So I want to talk to you a little bit about this. It's online. It does require real-time attendance. All right. It's a college course for the graduate program. For the master's program, it requires a bachelor's degree or a DVM with a minimum 3.0 grade point, and it may or may not require a GRE, right? It's 10 courses, 3 credit hours, and each course is about 15 weeks long, and the cost runs $16,000 to $20,000. They have other electives that you can take, and it's going to take you 2 years to complete it. All right, and you can look online to see. They have elective selections. They have 5 core courses and then 5 more electives, right? And they include wildlife. Then they have a graduate certificate program. It requires a bachelor's degree or DVM with a minimum 2.0 grade point average. It's the 5 core courses. It costs about $8,000, and it'll take you 1 year to complete that, all right? So for those who want to do that, again, a degree is not required to do veterinary forensics work, but that is one option for training, all right? Then what we created on Vetfolio is an online certificate course, series of courses. This does not require membership of Vetfolio. It's available to the public. It's online, it's self-paced, so there's no real-time requirements, and there's no deadline for completion. Right now there's 6 courses. It's about 62 hours of lectures with multiple instructors. It runs $375 per course. So the total is going to be $2,250 to complete all of them. The topics include small and large animal, exotics, avian, small mammals, and crime scene investigation. There's more courses we're working on to be out for 2018, and they've started a Spanish translation that will start popping up in later this year in 2017. This is just a list of some of the courses. So in groupings together, we've got testimony, and so each course is about 10 hours. Some of them are broad, like general a collection of evidence from animals. And then it moves on to, we've got animal hoarding, puppy mills, animal fighting, necropsies, and then one course is completely focused on the non-dog cat species. So everything from wildlife to equine to exotics to small mammals to aquatics, right? And then Leslie Woods, who's from UC Davis, she talks about necropsy considerations and exotic species. Okay, and then the crime scene courses include blood evidence, forensic entomology, DNA, and large-scale cases including burial and excavations and processing surface remains. Okay, and that's just more information. It's at vetfolio.com/forensics where you can get more information. Okay. So lastly, I want to show you a case, just a brief case that shows how all these different agencies work together and the needs for multiple expertise. So this was a puppy mill in Tennessee. It was in July. It was hot. There were over 600 dogs, over 100 cats. We also had horses, donkey, macaw, and chickens, and a goat. And the crime scene was 90 acres. Right. The report, I was a supervising veterinarian, so I did the report on all the dogs and cats, and it was over 70 pages long. It was one report. So the personnel, it was Humane Society of the United States, the ASPCA, they brought in veterinarians, paid and volunteer veterinarians, veterinary technicians that were paid and volunteers. We had animal handlers, investigators, sheltering experts, and people to transport the animals. We also involved the Tennessee VMA and the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. We had the state veterinarian on scene. We had veterinary technicians, and then they put a call out statewide where we got in volunteer. We had over 20 volunteer veterinarians and veterinary technicians. Then from the local shelter, I believe it was Nashville, they brought in veterinarians, veterinary technicians, animal handlers, and people for transport. In the local veterinary hospital, we had a veterinarian and his veterinary technician, and then we had the local district attorney, prosecutor, and investigators from the sheriff's department. So that's all the people to make this case. And we were 3 days at the crime scene, and then more days at the shelter. We took an old tire warehouse and converted it to a shelter. But this is just an example of what you'll see. This is where the moms and puppies were, some of them. There was over 200 moms and puppies inside here, and then all this chaos. That's what it looked like inside. And so we've got to process this as a crime scene. We also have to triage and do animal assessment. And you can just see there's drugs. It's a filthy mess. Yeah. So, and you can imagine the smell and the heat. We had Newfoundlands, which have no business living outside in Tennessee. That were chained up and in a pen, and then there's one outside the fence. So we had loose dogs that we were going to have to get. We had puppy hutches up over the hill and through the woods up on a hill. There was this. We had hundreds of dogs up there. No water source up there. We'd have to bring water up there. In the plastic igloo dog houses, which are nothing but ovens. And then we have to have these gators and different types of vehicles to pull trailers because we have to bring the animals down to remove them. Those are loose animals under the main residence living there, and we have to get them out. And then we had dogs inside, Newfoundlands again, inside this fallen down barn. They were digging, trying to get cool. So, and then again, another over the hill through the woods, we had dogs up there, loose German Shepherds, and then their puppies were nesting underneath the dog houses. So it was, then we had the killing field where we had the defendant would take the dogs when they were no longer producing, and she would shoot them there and then leave them. All right, so we had to process that as well. So, and then this was our shelter. It was all nice and clean. It was, again, an old tire warehouse, and we set up a temporary shelter. So you have to have a whole crew of doing that and monitoring of those animals and assessing them. So these are some of our volunteer veterinarians, and what happened is while we were at the scene for 3 days, the local veterinarian that was back at the shelter doing examinations, because we were doing critical examinations on scene and then transporting the rest of them back to the shelter, and they had a group of vets there, and it was reported back to us that all those examinations were done. They had left, that veterinarian had left to actually go out of town, and when I get back to the shelter, I see that we have half the animals have not been examined. And most of our volunteer veterinarians had left. So what we did is we set up stations in 3 rooms, and we used 4 veterinary technicians in each room, and they would do most of everything I needed, and I would just run from room to room to do the examinations until we got a few more vets to come in. And we found this out about noon, and by 9 o'clock that night, we had examined over 200 dogs. So we got the exams done, but that's the critical nature of the veterinary technicians, at the roles that they can play. And these veterinarians and the veterinary technician, the 2 guys are the veterinarians and the technician, they work emergency. So I always say that they're always crazy. They can stay up for 24, 36 hours straight. So they were ideal to help us there. So lastly, considerations in doing these cases. The biggest mistakes you can make is going beyond your expertise, whether it's case involvement or going and speaking on cases that you have not done. Or have no expertise in. You always want to refer cases to those with more suitable expertise. I do that a lot. If that is not my area of expertise, I will refer a case. Consider consulting with others. It doesn't mean, like, if you call me to consult with me on a case, it doesn't mean that I will take over the case or that I will even be involved, because we do this as part of routine veterinary practice. We talk to internal medicine specialists, surgeons, all the time, and then we take what they tell us and we decide whether that applies to our case, on a medical case. So we certainly can do that on a forensic case. Establish resources such as medical examiners or forensic experts, especially medical examiners on gunshots. They're the ones that see them all the time, right? So they are a great resource. Remember, everything that you say or do will be under scrutiny for current and future cases. So anything you post on Facebook, on social media, anything you say to the media, it's going to be out there. Any electronic correspondence you have on a case, you want to save that, because that can be subject to discovery. And again, you need experience and training. I can't stress that enough. So that's the end. There's my contact information, and I believe we will turn it over to questions.
Well, well, thank you so very much. That is a lot of information. So if everybody could please type in your questions that you have right now, and I will relay them to Dr. Merck. That was very good. Let's see. So we have some questions that have come in. Let me read them because I was listening. One thing is, how do you deal with this on a wellness sort of an issue? Because obviously this is very emotional. So what do you suggest for people who might get too involved in these cases?
There's several things to do. Number one, you cannot be invested in the outcome. Beyond what you do, there are so many things that affect the outcome of a case, right? Legal, political, you play a crucial role in a case. So if a case outcome isn't good, you can't let it devastate you. You need to find out why and try to understand and learn from it. If there was anything you could have done, or that's where advocacy may come, your laws may need to be improved. So that's one, don't be involved with the outcome. Two, the first thing you do, it's the same thing you do in veterinary medicine every day. You're seeing a kitten and then you get hit by a car. You have to compartmentalize. You are part of a team. The whole world and responsibility of this case does not rest on your shoulders. So you will have you need to develop relationships with the investigator, that you can talk things through, that you can talk it out, because your family's not going to want to hear about it. It's confidential, so you shouldn't be talking to others about it. So you can help verbalize concerns and things about that, but compartmentalize and focus on you have a job to do. The suffering has stopped, or you're going to mitigate it. So if they're deceased, the suffering has stopped. Or if they're alive, you're going to mitigate it, either through treatment or euthanasia. So now it's your job to focus on how you can tell the story of that animal and be passionate about how you're going to present that objectively and get justice, or try to seek justice. So that's where your focus becomes. It's hard to, because you have to tell the story of the animal, because I'm very empathetic to animals, is when I'm telling how they suffered and the vocalization they would have made or what they would have done, I need to do that and move on, right? So that's how in the process, because the hardest part for me is to write the report, because now I've got to tell the story. Work-life balance with this is I do watch Investigation Discovery Channel a lot, because it helps me put into perspective that people do bad things. I think it does that. I like to read a lot of fictional murder mysteries. Again, I think it helps put it into perspective. In being creative, I need to create things. I like to do needlework, quilts. I've started taking up adult coloring, just something to bring in something positive. And I just leave it at the door. I'm still great friends with the U.S. Attorney on the Michael Vick case. On all my investigations, I have, we would talk every day. Practically on these cases. So that's a way to let it loose. Physical exercise is a great help. But again, I think veterinarians tend to take on too much on these cases. It's not just you, right? It's like, okay, it's happened. Now what do I need to do? What do I need to do to help with this case and focus on that role? It's the same thing when you got a suffering animal that comes into a hospital. You cannot lose it. You got to focus on caring for them and treating them and diagnosing them. So it's the same kind of deal, right? And trust that your team, which includes law enforcement and prosecutors, will do the right, you work with them.
Right. We're really good advice all around for wellness and balance. Which one of the books listed on the slide would you recommend to read first to start learning and getting involved in veterinary forensics?
So the most comprehensive is the Veterinary Forensics Animal Cruelty Investigation, second edition. It's from Wiley Publishing. The book that's coming out is a case book. The others are supplemental, like that journal, the Veterinary Pathology Journal from September 2016. There's some other books that, if you're interested in wildlife, to do that. The Monroes did one. It's very small and it has some pathology, but I cited a lot in the other book. So right now, and I'm hoping someone else comes out with some more, but right now that's the one that has pretty much everything. There's little bits and pieces, like I said, in the shelter medicine book, but if you're doing shelter medicine, you should have that book anyways.
There you go. Yeah,
but the most comprehensive one is the Veterinary Forensics Animal Cruelty Investigations.
Okay, very good. Now I have a attendee that is program director for veterinary assistance programs that have students that are interested in animal forensics. So do you think the Vetfolio courses would be appropriate for them, or is there a better direction for technicians?
Oh, absolutely. The Vetfolio courses are great. And, that's for all students, whether veterinary technicians and or veterinary students. In fact, a student at Cornell got college credit for some of the Vetfolio courses to supplement their education on that. Oh. So yeah, absolutely. And they're all race approved. So
right.
You get your CE.
Now, do you have to do all of them, or you can just pick which ones you want, or does it make sense to go right through the whole thing for Vetfolio?
You have to do the entire course of 10. And so it makes more sense to do that. We tried to group them appropriately. So yeah, you have to do the group. You can't just pick one or two out of a course, one or two lectures out of a course.
Okay. Yeah, there's lots of questions about Vetfolio.
Sure.
Let's see. Recommend specifically current. Veterinary students. You said that some of the schools have courses and others just have short courses. So what would you recommend specifically for current veterinary students?
For current veterinary students, beyond the Vetfolio courses, because that's what I would recommend, because they're self-paced. You can stop and start. Like I said, there's no time framing, so you can adjust your schedule. You could do it for 15 minutes and then do it on a weekend, whatever. So I think those are the most user-friendly ones. I think that's easy, and it follows the textbook, the veterinary forensics textbook on this, the small animal. And they're 1 hour to 2 hours max. There may be 3 hours on animal fighting under crime scene stuff. And the crime scene courses are labeled that just because they're beyond the examinations. It kind of works for investigators and veterinarians. The blood stains, knowing some basic about blood stain analysis, and because a veterinarian needs to be involved in that analysis because they're the only ones that know how animals bleed and their behavior. Human blood stain experts don't know anything. They know the blood stain, what it means, but they don't know what created it. They don't know the species, right? So you got to have both. So that's why we grouped them that way.
I have another question from a veterinary student asking about the clinical rotations. What would you recommend if you're interested in veterinary forensics?
So that comes up for students and elsewhere. There's very few. They have to have a caseload. Like, I don't have enough caseload to take on interns. ASPCA's Berg Memorial Hospital, Dr. Robert Reisman runs their unit there, and they have tons of cases. And so they take in interns. I don't know if they're doing residents, but they're taking internships or externships there. And he knows, his email is robert.reisman, REISMAN @aspca.org. And so he's fine with that contact. He's an excellent forensic veterinarian. And they have the caseload to do it. Hillsborough County, Florida has a caseload, and they may or may not be able to take at any given time an externship. So it's finding places like that have the caseload. Oregon Humane Society, they have a students rotating all the time through the vet school there. I don't know if they take outside externs. So it's finding an agency that's doing the work and has the caseload, so it's worth your time to come in and do an internship.
Very good. Right. Good suggestion. So a lot of this seems to be self-started at this point, because it doesn't seem to be a clear pathway to get involved in veterinary forensics. So you really have to push and be a little bit creative. Is that correct?
That is correct. I mean, there may be opportunities volunteering or being on a list for a national organization, like some Best Friends sometimes does it, American Humane, ASPCA, and Humane Society United States. But full-time, employment, it's just not there unless you create that. Working at your local shelter that does those investigations, then you might be able to start to carve out a niche as they do more and more cruelty. The veterinarian in New Mexico started working with the local sheriff and then convinced them they needed to build a shelter, and they put her on contract. So it's part-time work. So that's how I got started, was just getting my foot in the door and consulting and working on the cases, volunteering at least at the beginning, so that you develop relationships and then they can start paying you. Right. But it's really hard to do this full-time. The exceptions would be if, again, at shelters or government agencies. The ASPCA does hire sometimes veterinarians, but again, it's going to be large scale only, primarily, that you're going to be doing. And maybe some miscellaneous other stuff, which is fine, but that's going to be, you will be on the road a lot. Yeah.
Well, and here's somebody who has an interesting look at it. He or she has a background in technical writing and development of training materials, and is a vet tech. So that seems like it would be really useful for those 70-page reports, correct?
Oh my gosh, yes.
So that's where people should look at their skills and put it together, saying, well, I have all this. Right.
And I could see that also. Everybody needs SOPs. Your local shelter, the veterinarians, they need SOPs. No one has the time or the skill set necessarily to do it. So I think that's another place where you could develop training, work with your, local government agency that's doing those to work on a training manual, because they
Right.
always have turnover. That would be an excellent thing to do with
Right.
them, developing
So if you're
SOPs. Yeah.
a writer and attention to detail, that would be wonderful.
Yes. Yes.
And just a question: is it legal for police to open fire on dogs when they're going into a property, or is that just judgment?
It's always judgment, and it's if they legally can if they're in fear of bodily harm or whatever. And it's changing. Different states, like the state of Texas now requires, because of a civil case, that all police attend training on, dangerous dog handling and other options. So there's a big push. I just did it with Humane Society of the United States. They're doing state humane trainings throughout different states, and we just did Oklahoma to hit all of law enforcement in 5 days to train them on alternate uses. What else can you use? You could use your pepper spray. You can use your taser. So it's that kind of training that has to happen, because if it's unreasonable, which we've seen, that's what is getting the police in trouble, where the animal was not a threat, or they could have gotten back in their car, or called animal control, or whatever the issues are, or some of them have been on a catch pole and they shot them. I'm sure several people on here have seen those videos. That recreates a civil case, and the one in there's just got awarded last month in Delaware. It was a civil case, and it was over $1 million. Over $1 million against the police. So they're starting to wake up and go, we need to be doing things differently. Yeah.
Excellent. And veterinarians and the veterinary profession could be very instrumental in that. So that's
absolutely.
That's excellent. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Something a little more practical. What equipment do you need to bring to the scenes, such as the puppy mill case that you had?
Well, that's going to vary. That's going to be part of your planning. There are certainly things to do your examinations, but for large scale, there's actually on my website, there's a list, I think it's on there. It's certainly in the book, of things to consider in your large scale planning response. Because you forget, there's little things you forget, like 18 gauge needles, do you have enough to get fluids, or an otoscope or an ophthalmoscope, but your standard stuff, and then it's your forms, your documents that you're going to need, and then animal handling equipment, but that's online. I'm pretty sure that list is online as a list.
Oh, excellent. Well, we are over time. We had a lot of people that wrote in and said, thank you so much for this presentation, and I thank you as well. So I am going to have to cut off the questions, and will you be willing to take questions for people afterwards with the contact information you had written?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Feel free to
Wonderful.
do that.
Wonderful. Well, I think this has been a wonderful presentation, and I appreciate everybody coming here. This has been recorded, and it will be posted in a few days at avma.org/career webinar. So I hope you go ahead and take a look at it, or if there's other information on future webinars will be posted there. And then we have all of our other presentations that have happened in the past that are posted there. So take a look and see some of those recordings.